Connor, welcome to the podcast. I'm super excited to work with you today, man. Always great to reconnect with an LVC alum that way. For people who aren't familiar with you and all the incredible stuff you've done in the PT space, and now kind of bridging the gap between the physical therapy background and the financial industry, would you mind filling them in a little bit about who you are and all that you've got going on?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, first of all. And yeah, it's fun to be an alum of the same school and see the different directions that you've gone with things. And yeah, I've kind of gone a unique direction too, which is why we reconnected. But PT by degree, but at this point, full time fiduciary financial planner and certified student loan professional. So my niche, if you will, is people who have a high amount of student loan debt, which is a lot of people, and really just kind of tailoring their financial plan, their goals, whether it's start a business or do their own thing, work for a company, and really just kind of niche down and say, hey, how do we do that best while you carry that student loan debt?
I think that's super, super fascinating. And as you mentioned, you've kind of made this transition from very clinician heavy to now a little bit more financial planning and financial assistance side of things that way. Walk me through kind of what led you to that transition, because I think just looking at some of the historical data for individuals in both the performance and the rehab spaces, it seems like they get into these spaces with good intentions and they put a lot of time and effort and energy and resources into it. And it seems the careers in these spaces don't last as long as they would like them to.
Yeah. So my story and how I ended up here is really my wife is a PT. I'm a PT. We got married while we're in PT school. So guess what you talk about when you're talking about marriage? You talk about a wedding. Guess what you talk about when you talk about a wedding? You talk about finances because weddings aren't free, right? And guess what you talk about when you're both in DPT school? You're talking about student loans. So that was kind of the start of the conversation. We just got married our first year of PT school. We had 2 years after that. And we were financially dependent for our first 2 years of marriage, which is the opposite goal of most people. Most people are FIRE, right? Financially independent, retire early. We were the total opposite. It was, hey, we're living off of our parents' help and blessing and student loans. So super humbling to say, hey, we're married, but we're financially dependent on those two things. So I said, hey, we got to figure this out. I always had an interest in finances. Fortunate my dad is a CPA, so I kind of had the person to ask the questions to, but started getting into all the books, the podcasts, the YouTube videos, like all that stuff that you do. So when we graduated, we had a plan for our own student debt, being, dual DPTs, going into that world and having a decent chunk, but also started helping some colleagues, started helping some friends. That kind of organically turned into, hey, I know a little bit more than a lot of my friends. I actually started doing some lectures at different PT schools around the country, starting locally. And at this point, 5 years later from when I started that, I do webinars for a lot of different programs around the country. I actually work with some PT businesses in the space to do webinars for their employees and educate them. And along the way, too, decided to not be the guy who wrote a bunch of blog posts and actually get some real credentials, if you will. And that's where I passed some tests. The first one, the certified student loan professional, which is a riveting 2.5 hour exam on just student loan advice. And then I also passed another exam called the Series 65 to be a fiduciary financial planner. And in the works right now, I'm working through the CFP curriculum, which is another finance test. So kind of lifelong learner mentality, which I know you have, and just also saying, hey, how do I help this group of people that is kind of just like me, have a bunch of debt, have a passion, want to do what they really love? The problem is a lot of these healthcare fields are you don't make what you want to make, even though you really love it. And you've got this huge burden, which is student debt, which is only getting worse, and happy to talk about that. But that's my journey and my story and why I'm truly passionate about helping people, because I truly believe if you understand some of these nuances, these tax rules, these student loan rules that do change over time, it can be life changing. That's also part of my personal story of being able to switch from clinic director to doing this full time now.
And I want to dive into that a little bit more because, as you mentioned, when you understand the rules of the game, you can actually start to bend them a little bit. Now, notice I did not say break the rules. We are not
Not a good idea to break the
we are,
rules.
we are not committing tax fraud here. We do not endorse that. We do not recommend that. That is asking for trouble. However, if you understand them, you can bend them slightly. And I've heard of several cases of people doing that quite well and quite successfully in the past. And I think from what you shared with me just the other day, actually, you're able to do that in that you're able to delay your student loan payments for several months, which is something that I feel like a lot of people are not familiar with. They don't understand that, like, there are times when you can actually push it off a little bit and not be paying every month. Like, this is different than a car payment or a mortgage, right? It's not so much set payment due every single month if you understand, again, the rules of the game, which in your case, I believe, related back to income totals. Is that correct?
The name of the game really is federal student loans are totally different than every other type of debt and should be
Mm.
treated as such. And I would even say we're not even bending the rules. We're just following the exact rules that most people have absolutely no idea about. So, for instance, examples like if you graduate and you have no income, you can do this thing called an income driven repayment plan,
Mm.
and it's income driven. So, if your income is low, you have a low payment. If your income's higher, you have a higher payment. But the point being, most new grads, if you just graduated from school and you had no income the previous year on your tax return, you can get a $0 payment. Now, certain student loan repayment plans have things like interest subsidies. Now, that's kind of a financy word, right? Interest subsidy means the government will subsidize, they will cover the interest that's typically collecting beyond whatever your required payment is. So again, in this example, which is what I took advantage of like 3 years ago when I actually switched and I went from normal PT salary to zero income being self-employed, I used that because I truly had zero income. And that's the point of these income driven repayment plans. So I had the $0 payment, but the interest of my loans was all being covered by the government during that time window, which again allowed me, as you know, in business growth mode, your income starts pretty low and ideally it gets higher, but it kind of gave me a 1 year window to say, hey, how do I manage things? So for someone who's thinking, oh, I just graduated, I can't afford my student loan payment. If you know the rules, you most certainly can. And in some cases, can even get some of that interest covered by the government. Other nuances are if you're saying, I hate my job, I want to quit, I'm burned out, or I just want to start my own business. How do I do that while I'm staring at 6 figures of federal student loan debt? Well, guess what? You probably can. You can lower your payment because now your income's lower. Yes, you have to have a plan. Yes, that's not a super great long-term strategy to lower your payment, and never pay on your loans again. Although there are options like loan forgiveness, which is another can of worms that we can open. And most people think, oh, well, you have to go work at a nonprofit, Connor, if you're going to do loan forgiveness. Spoiler alert, you can work anywhere you want or be self-employed and also get student loan forgiveness. And that's something that not very many people know either is if you can keep your income lower, sometimes it can be financially advantageous to actually make a small payment and go for long-term loan forgiveness, which again, it's not even bending the rules. It's certainly not breaking the rules. It's just here's the rules. Do you know them? Can you take advantage of them or do you not?
And just to make sure I've got it clear in my own head, as you were running through that, that is all specifically in relation to federal student loans, correct?
Yeah, everything I just mentioned is federal student loans, which again are their own little weird type of debt that is very different and you therefore treat very different. Just like if you're treating a patient, right? Like this is really unique. We can do some things differently for that versus if you have private student loans, that is not the case. Private student loans are about as simple as it gets. Read a Dave Ramsey book or whatever you want. Like you're just gonna have to pay it off. And if you pay it off faster, you pay less in interest. That's super straightforward. But again, federal student loans, which is typically what most people get from grad school, is gonna be a totally different animal, especially if you have a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned that concept of forgiveness of those loans. Is that something that it can be the full amount, just a partial amount? Is that something that anyone in the allied healthcare space would be eligible for? OT, SLP, all these other rehab provider type things? Or is that only PTs? And does that even extend to people who maybe don't even go the clinical route and maybe, they graduate with a degree in exercise science undergrad and they said, hey, you know what? This is exactly what I wanna be doing, but I'm still 60, 70K in the hole here.
Absolutely. It is to anybody. Don't have to be a healthcare provider, don't even have to work in healthcare. You could be a lawyer, a physician, a dentist. I work with all these types of folks. Um, yeah, as well as people who aren't in healthcare at all. So you can get loan forgiveness in any route. There's really two different types of loan forgiveness, and I'll break it down. So the one that most people have heard of is called PSLF. So that's public service loan forgiveness. And that's you work 10 years full time at a nonprofit and once you check the box, you make 120 months of payments, which is 10 years. Now you can get your loans totally forgiven. And that's what most people have heard of. The other route is called long term forgiveness. And that gets a little bit more complex. But the benefit is you can, again, work anywhere, be self employed, be part time. You could not work at all. You could be a stay-at-home parent or, someone who doesn't work. And as long as you make the income-driven repayment, you can get your loans forgiven after 20 years or potentially 25. Or there's even a new income-driven repayment plan where it's 30 years. So again, this is not the route for everybody, like everything finance, right? But it is a route. And if you have a very high debt to income ratio, let's say you have twice the amount of debt as your income, which again is not that uncommon, frankly, especially in like the PTOT allied health space. Sometimes that is very advantageous to go that route, can open up money on your monthly budget and also actually save you money over time if you go that route.
You mentioned something really interesting there, the monthly budget, because a lot of people, they've never had to budget before. They just spend. And if they're spending too much, then it's simple. Oh, just go make more money, right? Make more money. And then we don't have to worry about budgeting that way. But I feel like there's this growing trend of budgeting and planning for things and kind of understanding where your money is going. And a lot of people I talk with seem to tell me that they lose money to places they didn't even know they were losing it to, whether that's so many streaming subscriptions or other things that way. It goes all over the place and it's difficult to keep track of. How have you been able, both yourself and just working with people, to master that budgeting process also in a way that doesn't take up a whole lot of extra time or stress? Because I feel like most people, they don't want to spend extra time plugging numbers into spreadsheets to figure out how much they have to spend month to month, if I had to guess, right?
100%. That's how I started budgeting. Like most finance nerds, had an Excel sheet, would go through the credit card and the bank statements, plug it all in, keep track at the end of the month, be like, all right, where did we land? What categories? Have my own little sheet. Since then, guess what? Life gets busy. Married, have two kids, one on the way. And it's like, hey, I don't have an extra hour or two just to figure out what happened. So I actually use a tool. It's called Monarch Money. There's tons of different budgeting apps you can download, but I really love that tool. That's actually what I have, my financial planning clients that I have an ongoing relationship with. That's what they use as well. And it's an awesome tool where it just collects all of your data. You can link all of your credit cards, bank accounts, investment accounts, loans, and it's going to pull through all the data. And then you can create rules. You can kind of streamline and automate to just like say, hey, let's spend our time thinking about what's my goal? How do I get there? Talking about productive things rather than like an autopsy of what the heck's happening because we don't even know. So obviously, like anything, take some time to kind of develop that and get that tool built out. But once you have it built out, you can get some really quick snapshots of, hey, what came in, what went out, where'd it go? Okay, how much is left? Where do we put it? And how does that relate to your student loan plan, your overall goals? Is it starting a business, getting married, buying the home, doing whatever you want to do? So that's my favorite tool and that's what I use right now. But there's other ones in the space. I'm just biased to the one that I'm most familiar with, right?
Right, absolutely. And you had mentioned also about that debt to income ratio piece that way. And I think a lot of people are understanding the debt piece now in the sense that, okay, we want that to be as low as possible. But I think a lot of people struggle with the what I'll call the income optimization, if you will. And it's been amazing to me how many people just accept the first offer they're given out of school or when they interview and they never try and negotiate or push for just a little extra or even explore what the benefits look like. I remember the first job that I took out of school, I had no idea what benefits I was going to need or anything to that effect. I was 24 years old at the time and I was still on my parents' health insurance, so life was good. I'm glad I was still on my parents' health insurance because it would have been like a 12 or $13,000 deductible plan, annual deductible plan that was provided by the employer. So on one hand, okay, employer sponsored health insurance, great. But on the other hand, 13,000 a year as a deductible, man, that's a lot of money to potentially have to shell out if something, unforeseen hits, for lack of a better way to put it that way. Do you ever work with people and how have you kind of suggested or gone about kind of optimizing maybe more the income side of the equation and not just necessarily the debt side of the equation, if you will?
Yeah, there's so many different routes as far as when we think about income. That's kind of like the fun side of like, what's your passion? What's your passion project, your side hustle? Are you going to work PRN in addition? But the lowest hanging fruit is certainly just understand what offers in front of you. Get more than one offer. Even if your dream job is sitting right here and maybe you were a student and they're going to hire you on, or maybe you have a previous relationship, you're like, this is where I want to be. They gave me an offer. Don't be afraid to go get that other offer down the street because maybe it's going to be a lot higher. And that gives you the ability to have a conversation. I've personally done that and negotiated to get like 10% higher, which moves the needle, right? My wife has done the exact same thing to say, hey, this is where I want to be, but so and so is offering this. Is there any chance you can get there? And that's just a super simple, super not even a confrontational because some people have an issue with just like, oh, I don't know my worth or I'm afraid to ask. And like, no, ask and get paid what you want, especially if you're specialized in some sort of whatever avenue it is, get paid what you're worth. I'm 100% advocate for that. And don't be afraid to ask. So I think that's the lowest hanging fruit is just get multiple offers so you actually see what the market allows and then have the conversation and ultimately probably still pick the one that's the best fit culture wise and all of those things. The second
I go ahead.
the second piece to that is just, again, don't just look at the salary, the sticker price. Let's say it's a PT, you get offered 80 or 75. Look at the whole package because to your point, maybe one provides health insurance, maybe one doesn't. Easily a $5,000 value. One provides retirement and gives you a match, which is just putting extra money in retirement. The other one doesn't. Easily a couple $1,000 value. So, like some of those line items, if you just look at the sticker price or the salary, you might be missing the big picture if you actually want to get the most valuable offer. And again, just the more you know, the more you can have that conversation and have a high level conversation. Other things like, can I get a fully covered Con Ed budget? I remember when I first graduated PT school, went and got some certifications, was in a fellowship. That was like 5K in just Con Ed to get to where I was at, fully covered by my employer. So yeah, that is a valuable offer if that's something that you're looking for. So again, look at the whole package, not just one piece. When you're treating someone, right? If someone's shoulders hurt, you're only going to look at their shoulder, right? Absolutely not. You're gonna look at their neck, their thoracic. You're gonna look all around and say, "Hey, what is contributing to the way that this is moving?" In the same way with your job offer, don't just look at the salary, look at the whole package. How flexible is it? Do I have opportunities for growth if that's important to you to move up into a leadership role? Or is it, "Hey, I just want to get the experience here and go do my own thing?" Again, all those things should be looked at when you're thinking, "Hey, how am I looking at a job offer?" As much as it's the numbers, it's also the things that you can't really put a number to, the culture, the patient population, the experience, which can then really just catapult you into exponential growth rather than just a couple $1,000s here.
Absolutely. There is a institution, I'm gonna keep it nameless here for various reasons, but I remember talking with some of the individuals there, and their benefits package alone was equal to about 75% of the salary that they get. So, let's say hypothetically for easy math, you're making 100,000 a year. That means your benefits are worth about 75,000 a year when you factor in the health insurance benefits, the retirement, the matching, all of these other things that way, which that's the other element to the equation is eventually you used the FIRE acronym earlier, right? Retire early. That's everyone's growing goal and dream and ambition from what I'm hearing, you know. On one hand, clinically, I've seen in the past 60, 70, 80-year-olds that need to work for different financial reasons. And on the other hand, I see this younger generation with a growing interest in retiring in their 40s or in their 50s and doing whatever it takes financially to make sure that they're comfortable and able to live like they want at that point, which is great. But you can get there a lot quicker if someone else is matching contributions to IRAs or 401ks, right? 3, 5. There's one employer that I heard about recently offering a 10% match, which is just unheard of from what I've heard from people that way. And it's like if they're willing to match what you put in, take advantage of that, right? So it's incredible to see that sort of element of the equation as well, I think.
Yeah, super important to just yeah, look at the whole package. Do they offer some sort of profit sharing? I've had some clients who work for professional sports teams and they sometimes get, "Hey, guess what? Your team made the playoffs. You get this big bonus or we're actually going to profit share and throw a lump right into your retirement plan directly." So those are all added incentives, added benefits that would definitely sway you if you're looking strictly financial one way or the other, but at the end of the day, just understanding this stuff again can really move the needle for whatever your goal is moving forward.
I will say personal experience, and I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this. in the past, when I've kind of set things up for myself, I've actually gone a revenue share route instead of a profit share. And my thinking around that was, if it's a revenue share, I'm getting paid first. If it's a profit share, I'm getting a percentage of what's left after everyone else gets their cut. So to me, in my head, and maybe this was the wrong way to think about it, if I can get a guaranteed percentage of what's coming in, period, that's going to be a percentage of a number that's going to fluctuate based on a lot of different factors that are out of my control, right? Like, if there's additional costs or additional equipment and stuff, the clinic might be less profitable, but that also means I get paid less for stuff that I really couldn't have controlled, if that makes sense.
I think it depends, the avenue that you're talking about. Are you talking about a business you own? Are you talking about a business that you work for? There's also a lot of rules, again, getting into the financy rules of if you own your own business, you can structure and you can actually open your own retirement plans. Things like a solo 401k is a really great option if you have that side hustle or if you're working 1099, which is just a fancy word for like PRN or self-employed for a company. There's different opportunities there to do versus if you actually have W-2 employees, which is, hey, you have like full-time or more than half-time employees, you're going to be a little bit more limited on the way that you set up certain retirement plans. And there's a lot of rules there in regard to that. So it definitely depends on the business structure, who's the owner, are there partners, are there employees, and that gets into the can of worms, which I'll spare the details there, but just important to know. And again, optimize. How do we optimize? If I give you $100 and you can put it in bucket A, bucket B, or bucket C, and there are very different tax implications for it, knowing which bucket to pick is the key because it takes no extra effort to put it in bucket A or bucket B. It's just clicking here might save you money more than bucket B, and there's different restrictions there too sometimes on, well, when can I pull that money out if it's a retirement account versus a different type of account? And then the other thing too, again, circling back to that niche with student loans, the way that you invest into a retirement account when you have student loans is very different than the way that you invest when you don't have them, especially from a federal student loan perspective. Because again, the income driven repayment plan, which is that weird word that I talked about earlier, it's actually based off, it's called your adjusted gross income. So if we talk definitions of words, right? This kind of financy, gross income. How much do you make? You ask your friend, how much do you make? They're going to tell you probably your salary plus your bonus. That's pretty much your gross income. Your adjusted gross income, you actually get to knock down that gross income number by pre-tax retirement contributions. So if you have a 401k and you put $10,000 in there, your gross income might be 80, but you put 10,000 into your retirement. Now your adjusted gross income is 70. Well, guess what? Now your student loan payment is even lower because of that AGI, adjusted gross income number being lower. So again, there's different ways to kind of manipulate again within the rules to say, hey, how do I save money on taxes and save on student loans? Other opportunities like that is things like a health savings account. That also lowers your adjusted gross income, lowers your student loan payment in these income driven repayment plans. So again, those are some of the things to think about to say, hey, how do I make it a win-win? Win for my retirement, win for taxes, and win for my student loan situation. Or if you don't have student loans, again, you might pick a different, perhaps like a Roth account, which is not pre-tax, that's called post-tax. So getting a little bit technical here and maybe too far in the weeds, but the point being, bucket A, bucket B, it takes no extra effort, no extra time to be able to pick which is the right bucket once you understand it. But knowing that can make a huge tens of thousands of dollars of difference down the road when you ultimately go to tap that money.
I love this. And to your point, and for people listening, they might be thinking about retirement, and we've just thrown a lot of different terms out at it. And it can be a little difficult to keep them all straight, right? Like traditional IRA, Roth IRA, 401k, Roth 401k. You mentioned nonprofits before. I think nonprofit is a 403b.
That would
Something
be
like
the retirement plan for
that.
a nonprofit organization.
And there's so many different account types out there. And there's also, I believe, limits to what you can annually contribute to each one. So I think, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think my Roth is like $7,500 a year or something like that. So there's so many different variables and factors that go into this. But I think the easiest way to simplify it, you already mentioned this, having that simple versus Roth distinction. Is it kind of the traditional where it's tax deductible? or is it something where you're funding it with kind of that after-tax money? Because that's great from a tax-free growth and tax-free withdrawal standpoint if you do it right, but at some point, you're paying the tax. It's just a matter, are you paying it upfront or are you paying it later, I believe.
Right, and again, that's part of what does a financial planner even do? It just says, "Hey, tell me your goals. How do we make sure that the buckets are right based on student loans, based on, hey, I want to use this money sooner than later, based on, hey, I think my income is higher now than it's going to be in the future, or no, my income's actually a little bit lower now than what it will be in the future." And that's kind of like just getting all of that organized and at the end of the day saying, "Hey, how do we put more money in your pocket and less money in the government's pocket?" Because I'd rather you have the money than pay more in taxes, especially if it's unnecessary. So that's part of the name of the game is just, hey, here's the rules in place. And when you understand them, you get to play the game. And yeah, kind of similar to when we're talking about just terminology and things. I think of my first anatomy class. I remember going to anatomy class and I'd never had one before. And it was like words like supraspinatus. And I don't know who your teacher was, but my teacher was awesome. But the professor was from Poland and I was listening to his accent, so I probably still say a lot of these anatomical terms incorrectly based on the way other people say them. But the point being, I had no idea what the heck those languages were. And then you start to find out, you're like, oh, okay, this is what the word is and this is what it means. It's the same way in the finance world. And that's part of my passion behind all of this is just, hey, if I can teach you the basics, that's going to be life changing when you think 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now by doing it right now, let's say you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, versus we've all seen the client again who's in their 60s and they say, oh man, I wish someone would have told me fill in the blank years ago. Because once you know, then you get things like compounding growth. And again, getting it right at the beginning just makes such a huge difference.
I could not agree more. When you're working with clients lately, what kind of goals are they coming you with outside of get relief and retire early? I'd imagine people are still trying to buy homes and buy cars and invest for their kids and stuff that way. Is that still kind of similar to what you see, or do you see other kind of new goals showing around?
I would say those are some of my most common goals, and most of my clients, for perspective, are 20s, 30s, 40s, I would say. So a lot of financial planners work with people who are kind of in retirement or pre-retirement. That's definitely the largest demographic. I'm kind of at the other end of the spectrum of, hey, we call it the accumulation phase of I've got a bunch of debt, I've got all the life goals, getting married, saving for a wedding, having a kid. That could be a really common goal, buying a house, moving, trying to like move up the ladder professionally. So that's kind of like the world of most of the clients. So those are some of the most common goals. And really the challenge is you've got X number of resources, but you've got all these different goals. How do we put them most effectively? And also some of the more fun conversations are, hey, you're doing great. You're crushing it. Let's actually map out you want to retire when you're 55. That's cool. What if it was 50? Or what if it was still 55? Or what if it was 60? But somewhere along the way, instead of waiting 15 years to totally retire, sit on the beach, do whatever you're gonna do. Most people who are high achievers, their goal is not retire and do absolutely nothing, at least in my experience in the conversations I've had. I know not I'm not super interested in like, I'm gonna do absolutely nothing when I'm retired. So what if we took that financially independent, you know, live in a Cracker Jack box and like your basement eating rice and beans for the next 20 years so you can be totally retired and do nothing? Well, what if we flipped that mindset and said, can I scale back my hours 10 hours a week so I can go do that thing that I really enjoy and still get there the same way? So some of those conversations are some of the most fun ones of like, hey, if you're burned out in the clinic and your true passion is to go start that business, like don't be a slave to that. What if you're able to scale back your hours, do your thing on the side, and what if it's still going to be okay? And you actually maybe you don't retire at 55, now you're looking at retiring at 60, but you're doing what you love, you're not as burned out, and you've got better balance in your life. Those are some of the more fun conversations that I'll say are really fun to put some numbers to so we can actually say, hey, go do that thing. Take that dream vacation. You're not going to blow up your entire financial picture. Go scale back your hours tomorrow and go do that passion project that you've always wanted to do. So,
Absolutely, absolutely, and keeping that in mind, I'm sure you get this question all the time, Connor. Knowing what you know now, if you were back in the LVC days where you're in school,
back in
what
my
kind of
prime,
things
aren't you
would
good?
you what kind of things would you do differently that way, if anything? Or what kind of advice do you have to individuals who are still a student and looking ahead at their career, whether it's strength and conditioning, physical therapy, chiropractics, AT, whatever it is that
Mhm.
way, how should they start planning for that financially when they're in school, as opposed to kind of being a little bit more reactive and waiting 5 to 10 years down the line and being, 33 and realizing, oh, I should probably figure this out now.
That's a great question. If I put myself in my shoes, back in PT school, I think when I was there, you're very much, what's the next test? What's the next practical? What's the next thing? And I was always someone who cared about my grades a lot and did pretty well and got pretty high grades when I was in school. I think I would put that on the sidelines a little bit more and say, "Hey, how do I get better experiences? How do I take advantage of better mentorship? Go do that extra thing and go learn about those things that are maybe less specific to PT." Because, yeah, I was like, "Hey, I wanna be the best clinician. I wanna go do this CMPT, COMT, get a fellow." And I think that was kind of ingrained in me to like, "Oh, you gotta do all this to be the best clinician." I think the things that really move the needle though, now that I talk about, is being connected to really smart people, people who are doing things different, getting different experiences are really important. And again, I was fortunate that I was able to do some of that. But when I look back, I'm like, "Man, I wish I would have spent a little less time and resources just getting that 99% on that exam." What if I would have gotten a 95, but done that cool thing? And like there was like a weekend that sticks out in my mind. It was actually a sports performance symposium, and they opened it up to students and said, "Hey, students can go for free." And it was like, "Oh shoot, there's a test on Monday. Am I really going to go to this Saturday all day course listening to these experts talk about different things?" And I decided to go to it because I just love sports, and that was something that I did when I was in college. I played basketball and football, Division 3, right? So I wasn't that good. But, like, that's something that I did and I was passionate about. I was like, "You know what? I'm gonna go do this." I made some connections. That also looks really great on a resume when you say, "Yeah, I've got good grades," but honestly, most people don't really care at all what your grade is when they go to hire them. I know I didn't when I was doing hiring. But what's pretty cool is like, oh, they did that extra thing where they took advantage of, like, meeting people who are really smart in the space. There was a guy who was a MLB rehab, PT. And I was like, that was really cool that I got to meet him and have that connection. And those are the things that I think really move the needle sitting on this side of the chair rather than the chair when I was listening to professors and getting lectured at every day.
Yeah, no, I could not agree more. And I think that's the kind of thing people don't understand the opportunity I think that they have when you're a student. And I still
Mhm.
play the same card now that I did 5 years ago. And maybe it's time for me to update that card, but I still play the young and curious card because I'm only 28 years old. I still like to think I'm the young guy in the camp that way. And I'm going to play that card as long as I can, right? I'm young, I'm curious, I'm interested, I want to hear more. And oh, by the way, the key thing for me has always been, what can I do to help you? What can I do to give
Mm,
back? And that's something I think Mike Fink is very big on this as well, kind of a servant-based mindset or servant-based leadership. I know I've had very similar conversations with Phil Plisky as well, but it just simplifies everything, right? It's like, hey, I'm here. This is
mm.
who I am. How can I help you? And I think if you do that to anyone, I don't care if we're talking, director of this, head of that, whatever it is, whoever you want to connect with, they're at least going to read your message and reply, because that's the kind of thing that not everyone does. If you truly mean it and you're very thoughtful and intentional behind it, you can get anywhere, but ultimately it comes back to what your goal is. And I think if you abuse that, people are going to pick up on it very quickly. So you have to be authentic, you have to be genuine, and you have to truly mean it. And if you don't, people are going to smell that out so fast, in my opinion.
I love that. Like you said, playing the student card or the young or the curious card or just the, "Hey, how can I help you?" is just a great question. And especially if you follow through on it and it's like, "Hey, I have a mutual connection that you guys might hit it off, you might not." But yeah, just kind of connecting people, being connected, and just learning from people who are a lot smarter. You mentioned a mutual mentor that we both have of Mike Fink. And yeah, he's been instrumental in me kind of like going this route. And actually, I remember a conversation with him. I was doing some lectures and stuff and was like, "Hey, I think I know a little about this." And I was actually helping out at a PT class doing, some manual techniques. And at the end of the class, he said, "Hey, just wanted to ask, like, if I can help any of you in any way, how could I do it? And I took him up on that. Right after that class, I went to his office and I said, "Hey, I have this crazy idea of building this online course for PT students on how to handle student loans because I can only give so much information when I have an hour in front of a class for a lunch and learn." And he, was just talking to him, but I'm like, "It's going to be so much work. I only have so little time." And he's just like, "Why don't you just do it? Like, why don't you just do it and then come back and talk to me? I think you've got something here." And it was kind of just that like external, someone that I had a lot of respect for, just saying, "Hey, I've got this crazy idea. I don't know if anybody will buy it. Maybe I just make this thing and it just goes into the abyss, but I've been playing around with this idea." And he's just like, "Just do it and then come talk to me." And I did. And that was the first course that I was able to sell to say, "Hey, you know, the school ended up purchasing it for their students." And it was like, "Hey, this cool thing of like, oh, wow, this is actually a way that I can help people and make some passive income." And just kind of like ultimately, fast forward a couple years later, I'm doing this full time, which is crazy. Of like, at that point, I'm volunteering, I'm helping at a manual therapy class. This one conversation from this one mentor who just says, "Hey, how can I help you? Or is there anything that like I can do?" I have a conversation. Fast forward 5 years, totally different trajectory of my life because of that one person who said, "Just do it. I believe in you. Do that thing and come talk to me." So kind of a cool shout out to a mutual mentor there.
Absolutely, and sometimes that's all you need with stuff, right? Like, I get ideas all the time, and I'm probably, again, playing the young guy card again. I'm probably still young, dumb, and stupid and energetic enough to try and pursue all of them as best as I can, right? Like, I have a hard time saying no, but it's like it's the kind of thing that sometimes you just need that one person to push you into it to really open that door and open up a lot of different opportunities that you probably didn't even think about or knew existed that way. Because I think, at least on what you've told me so far, I'm guessing your physical therapy career looks a little different now than you thought it was going to 5 to 10 years ago, right? And it's the
Yeah.
kind of thing that you don't fully understand what the future is going to hold for you. I think if you're open-minded and willing to explore, then you can end up anywhere, including like where you are now, where it's like, hey, I have a DPT, but I spend my days literally helping other people with their student loans and their finances, as opposed to, treating 15, 20 clients a day in the clinic that way, right? It's drastically different. And it makes me think of, there's a book I love, and I love to quote this, by Benjamin Hardy, called Slipstream Time Hacking. And essentially, he breaks it down like we've measured time incorrectly. A lot of people think of time like years and days and months, but in reality, it's more about distance traveled, right? So on the financial side, it's like, maybe in their lifetime, the average American accumulates $1 million. Cool. So if you accumulate $10 million, does that mean you lived tenfold the life of someone else
Mm.
because you went 10x further? Or if the average American goes to Hawaii once in their life, but because you've planned financially, because you invested smartly, which we didn't even get into investing, that's a whole separate conversation, I know. But if you do all those cards right, instead of going to Hawaii once in your life, you go 20 times. Does that mean you just lived 20-fold the life of someone else because you went that much further? And I think it's the kind of thing, as we, talk about topics like this, people are always like, well, I can be happy I'm 50K a year, and, I'll pay off my debt in 20 years or whatever that way. And it's like, that's fine. But if you really want to get the most out of this one life that we have here, I think locking in on the financials and getting this squared away can really make a huge difference for people.
It's a lot about what the money can do too, and that's it's funny enough as I talk about all these technical things when I'm working with folks, really it all circles back to, well, what does the money mean? Yeah, because you could live on 50K and some people are perfectly happy. Other people could live on 250K and not be happy at all. And it's how are we using that money as a tool? Because most people like vacation homes. Well, you need some money to have that vacation home, or most people like to scale back their hours and do something that they're super passionate about, their passion project. So again, money's kind of the tool, and understanding that and understand the nuance can definitely lead you to being able to use that tool better. So that's again something that's really fun. And the other thing that you mentioned there, which just made me think about, what advice would I give to my past self? A book that made a huge impact on me too was called How to Fail at Everything and Still Succeed. and it's by Adam Scott, I believe is his name. He's the comic writer for the comic strip Dilbert, which is kind of this business people who like work in a business think it's pretty funny. Admittedly, that's not my role, but he kind of just talked about, he's like, well, I'm not that good at drawing, but I'm okay at drawing. I'm not that funny, but I'm a little bit funny. And I have a corporate business background. So what he did was he said, I'm pretty good at all these things, but I'm not the best and I'll never be the best. So how do I create that Venn diagram where all of these things intersect? Well, guess what? When you write a comic, you don't have to be the funniest person like a stand-up comedy, but you have like some jokes. You don't have to be the best drawer and illustrator, but you need to be able to draw stick figures. You don't need to know everything about business, but he understands some of like the nuance there. So again, when I think about how do I take these translatable skills, okay, I understand a lot about physical therapy. I understand a lot about finance, a lot about student debt. Kind of right at the center of that Venn diagram is where I think I can be in that top 1% or 0.1% of everybody in the country, right? Because I'll probably never be the smartest in finances. There's a lot of people who are smarter than me. I'll probably never know the most about student debt. I'll never know the most about PT, but who's at that like intersection of all those, circles? And that's kind of where I think you can say, hey, if I can be the top 25%, a lot of different skills and then combine those to be the unique, person who knows all about those things and where they intersect. That was something that was really impactful for me and something that I think most people in the allied health professions, especially, you're probably really good at a lot of things. And those skills translate from treating a patient, deviating the plan of care, communication. Those will translate into other roles if you want to go do something different. Like with
I
the
think it's so, so helpful too, as you outlined, to draw that stuff out so you can visualize it in front of you. And now you don't even need the drawing skills to do it. You can just open up your AI, hit the little voice thing, and tell it to generate you a diagram of that and literally just see it all broken down in front of you. I think that's extremely, extremely helpful for any of these different things we've discussed, even in relation to finances, is some of these different things we discussed, right? Take the retirement accounts, write it all out, put it right in front of you so you can literally see the differences between them and decide what's right for you. And I think it's also important to note that it's okay to do multiple different things, right? I did
Mhm.
investments into a traditional IRA for a couple of years, and now I do everything into a Roth. But I've still got investments from before in the traditional. I don't add to it anymore, but it's growing and scaling on its own. So I think it's important to know that you don't have to just pick one team here. You can change teams. You can play both teams simultaneously. The options are really limitless, and I think that's the important piece too of working with someone like you who can guide people in the right direction, because you can almost get this analysis by paralysis effect, if you will, if you don't have someone kind of walking you through, or to use your analogy from before, that initial push to action or call to action from someone that you trust that way.
Yeah, just like you have a client in front of you, the plan of care is going to change over time, but they come to you because when they have that tweak that didn't go the way they expected, you probably have a decent idea when you see a client for the first time, whatever their diagnosis is, and you find out this is probably how things are going to go. But there's going to be a lot of nuance on the in between of, hey, we got to tweak this a little bit. We got to do this a little differently. And that's the value of right having an expert, of seeing someone like, hey, Dan, can you help me rehab, fill in the blank? Can you help me reach this goal? Because they're going to go to you and you're going to be able to tweak it exactly how it needs to be, right? It's the same way with finances. I just kind of a different lens of like, what are the accounts? What are the goals? Where do we put the money? How do we invest it? What do we do to kind of get you there? And then when life happens, you have that kid, you buy that house, you switch that job. Let's make those tweaks as we go. And that's kind of my best analysis of what is financial planning in a nutshell. It's not all that different than treating a patient.
I love that. I love that. I could not have said that any better, Connor. I realize we can probably talk about this stuff all day long that way, because there's just so much to it that way. And I know we're just scratching the surface today. Is there anything we missed as we were chatting, or anything else you wanted to cover?
I think at the end of the day, just if there's a call to action for anybody, it's either try and go learn this stuff yourself because the sooner you know it, the better you are. Or if you want to get there faster, work with an expert, work with someone who can provide the resources, or maybe be that direct contact to say, hey, am I doing these right? And then just go from there, because I don't know of too many people who work with a coach, work with an expert with something as impactful as whether it's a health issue or whether it's finances. they regret it down the road by saying, "Oh my gosh, I now know this for X number of years." So just go get the information, whether it's kind of self-consumed, favorite podcasts, whatever it is, or go work with an expert if you're like, I really don't want to deal with this at all, and just kind of find someone you trust and go ahead and move forward.
Absolutely, and for people listening who wanna find out more about you and obviously potentially even reach out and work with you, would you mind fill them in where they can find you at online and that sort of thing?
Sure. The company name that we have is After the DPT. So that's afterthedpt.com. You can reach out there. Even my personal email, if anybody just has any one-off finance questions or wants some more resources, it's just Connor, Connor at afterthedpt.com. I'm happy to point you in the right direction.
That's awesome. We'll link to all of that in the description below. That way, if you didn't quite catch it, you can just click there and see everything that Connor has going on. This was awesome, man. Really appreciate your time and all your insights.
Thanks so much for having me, Dan.